Hello guys, my name is Brenda Abatledi and I am the fifth presenter, the last presenter of this book. Now I'm going to tell you the advantage of textbooks. There are several points. I will mention three first here. The first one is textbook is standardized. It means there are so many people out there that have tested the textbook. So it passed the test and thus it has been standardized. So mostly we can believe or trust textbook. Because it has been standardized, the second point advantage of textbook is that it provides structure and syllabus for the program. Because it has been standardized, we are sure that the author have made the structure and the syllabus as well, and this will help the teacher. The third point is they maintain quality, because if you want to get standardized by other people or get tested and passed, you have to maintain the quality. We shall not doubt the quality of textbook because of this, and this is one of their advantages as well. Okay, on to the next point, advantage of textbook. The fourth one is that textbook provide so many resources because there are a team that make a textbook. So we are sure that textbook contain a lot of resources from so many other research, and this without doubt is one of the advantage of textbook. The second one is textbook is efficient because you can immediately read textbook and then see how you will learn it, what material you will choose, and whether you will choose it or not. Because of it, textbooks is efficient, and also because there are a lot of resources as well. This is the fifth point. And the next point is that textbooks also provide language model and input. For example, they give grammar structure, they give examples, they give activity in the textbooks, and that is language model and the input. This is the sixth advantage of the textbook. The seventh is that it helps the teacher and train them as well, because textbook is like a guideline for new teachers that don't know what to say or what to teach yet. They can simply look at the textbook and copy it and ask their students to learn from it or learn together or discuss from the textbook. Because of this, textbooks can also train the teachers. For example, when the teachers doesn't know there are this material that they haven't taught yet and the textbook mention it, the teacher can taught it to the teacher, can teach it to the teacher, to the student or to other teacher as well in the same subject. And the last advantage of textbook is that it is visually appealing, because you can see in textbook we can see so many text or picture with color or with not, and the design, it is designed to be appealing and motivating for students. So this is the last advantage of textbook that we might not find in other instrumental material. We have learned about the advantage of textbook, but it doesn't mean textbook doesn't have advantages. There are around 5 disadvantages of textbook. The first one is they might contain inauthentic content. Inauthentic here means it doesn't reflect what we encounter in daily life. Or in other words, the textbook content may be stiff and unnatural, that we might not be able to use them into the real life. This is the first disadvantage. And the second one is the content might be distorted. We don't know, the author or the publisher, they might make mistake and we blindly believe in the textbook. We don't know that the content is already been altered or distorted or edited into their own benefit. We don't know that. That's why we have to be careful in selecting textbook as well. The third one is it might not reflect the student needs. For example, the student needs the material A. They need this particular skill in their daily life, but the textbook might not give that skill. And this is why there are a lot of people that still goes to an English course outside of school, because usually the school use textbook that doesn't reflect the student's need. For example, the student needs TOEFL, but the textbook doesn't provide that. The textbook in general in like 10th grade textbook or 7th grade or whatever, that doesn't reflect the student needs. The fourth one is this might lower the teacher's skill. It's said before that textbook can train the teacher, but it also can make them less skillful. Why? Because teachers might be too dependent to the textbook, and this is why the teachers become lazy, or they just focus solely on the textbook and doesn't use other instrumental material. This can be very dangerous for teachers, so please make sure you do not entirely depend on the textbook. And the last one is that textbook might be expensive. As you know, that a textbook is quite expensive in the price, so not all students can afford it, especially if the textbook is not provided by the government or it's not free and students have to pay. In this case, there are a lot of students who cannot afford to buy the textbook. So please remind yourself as a teacher whether textbook is needed or not, and consider the price. We already know the disadvantage and the advantage of textbook, and because of this we have to evaluate which textbook we are going to use. How to do that? There are several tips, and here I'm going to divide it up. And the first, I'm going to give you about how to evaluate textbook. First, you have to ask yourself this question. The first question is, which class you will teach using the textbook? Either is the small class or a bigger class, because this determines what kind of textbook you need. Because in a smaller class, you might not need a textbook, but in a bigger class, you might need a textbook. It depends on you. You have the final choice. And the second question is whether the students still need to buy a workbook aside from this textbook, or the textbook already provide all the practices that the student need. Because you see, we have to consider the price as well. It's not complete yet, so the student still need to buy a workbook, or you choose a textbook that already provide the practices as well inside that. Still about evaluating the textbook. Now we have to know the teachers that are going to use the textbook. The first question you have to ask yourself is, what kind of teachers that is going to use the textbook? Are they experienced, or how many level they have in their training? What level they are in the training? Because different teachers might use different kind of textbook. There are several textbooks that is difficult to understand even for the teacher. So if the teacher cannot explain what is in the textbook to the student because of their level of training or because of how inexperienced they are not experienced at all, that will be a problem. So please also consider the one who will use the textbook. Also consider who is making the textbook. Can we believe them? Are they standardized, or are they well known, or something like that? The author and the teacher as well, because we know that there are several levels of textbook, the easier one, hardest. So you also have to contemplate that. The second question is how closely the teacher follow the textbook. The second question is, are the teachers native or not? Because if they are native, maybe the textbook they use will be different. Maybe they will use textbook from outside of the country, not the one inside. But if they are not native, maybe they will use the one that still have Indonesian or translation in the textbook, not for English, for example. And if the teacher is not native, you also have to ask whether the teacher is fluent in English or is capable of teaching or not, because this will also determine which kind of textbook that they will use. Still about the teacher, the third question you have to ask is whether the teacher that uses the textbook tend to follow the textbook or just use it as a research. Because if the teacher closely use the textbook without only using it as a research, it means that the kind of textbook that they need will have a broader or a detailed explanation about the material, because the teacher will closely follow the textbook, and also the practices or other activity have to be included in the textbook. They will choose that kind of textbook. But if the teacher only use the book as a research, or to be formal or to be convincing, then they might not need such a detailed textbook. They might grab textbook that doesn't contain all the material needed for students to learn ABCD English material. They might pick, for example, a novel. They might pick a textbook that doesn't have activities or practice inside, because they only use it as a research. It depends on the teacher. And the last question, but not the least, can the teacher adapt the book? For example, taking a small part of the book and then making her or his own method in delivering it. Yeah, there are kind of textbook that are hard to adapt. For example, the textbook that have slightly more complicated, that just explain and describe things without giving practice or something like that. Usually this is kind of research textbook. You might have found this in PDF that your lecturer send you. This kind of textbook is actually quite hard to adapt for the teacher. So the teacher also have to consider this. We have talked about how to evaluate textbook from the teacher aspect. Now we hop on to the student aspect. There are 5 points that we have to know. The first one is whether the student require the book or not. Does all the students require the book or not? Because this will affect to the other point as well. We have to think, is the textbook really necessary for all the students? Like in high school or middle school, there are several classes that requires all the students to buy, because all the activities will depend on that textbook, and that is what you have to consider. The second is, what does the student expect from the textbook? Does they expect a dialogue practice from the textbook, or does they expect a new vocabulary, or what they do expect, for example, the game, the fun things in textbook, or just a block text of wall without summary thing box or something like that. That is the third aspect. The fourth is whether how the student will use it. Oh no, that's the fourth. The third is, will the student use the book at school and at home, like at the 2 places? Will they use the book only at class because the teacher told them to do so, or they will also use the book at home to learn by themselves? Because if they will learn from book in their house without the teacher explanation, it means the textbook needs to be detailed and easier to learn. The teacher have to choose that kind of textbook. The fourth is whether the student will use this in the class activity or just as research, as I told you before. So either the student will fully depend, their activity in the class will fully depend on the textbook. For example, the exam will be question from the textbook, and then the activities in the classroom, the exercises will depend on the textbook all the time, or they will just simply use it like one time or twice or just once in a while. Because why? Because this will affect the last point, which is how much the student will have to pay for a book, or how much money they will pay or they can pay for the book. Because if the teacher doesn't depend solely on the textbook and only use the textbook as the resource, it means the teacher might not require the student to buy the textbook because it's only for research. But if the teacher uses it like in the class activity, it depends on the textbook, and then the textbook is also easy to understand, so the student also need this at home. It means the teacher have to make the student buy the book, but they will have to consider the price. There are some textbooks that are more expensive than the other because of the publisher, because of the author, and many other factors. Teachers also have to consider this aspect in evaluating a textbook. We have know how to evaluate textbook, and then the last section I have to explain is the criteria of textbook. According to Konigsberg, 1995, he said that there are 4 main criteria. I will explain the first one. The first criteria is whether the textbook has to match the student's need, has to correspond to the student's need, and match the aim and the goal or the objective of your learning plan. Because every teacher might have a different goal or objective according to depending on their own view of language itself. Maybe some teachers will focus on grammar, some will focus on vocabulary, or some will focus on writing, speaking, and other aspects. Well, they have to choose which textbook that match their aim or objective. That the textbook have to reflect the needs of the learner needs, because if not, then the textbook will not be useful. If the first point reflect the student's need in this case is the aim and the objective of the teachers, the second point said that the textbook have to be able to support the students use of language, how they will use the language, because maybe the students also have different view from the teachers. For example, the teachers need the students to know about vocabulary, but the students will need speaking in the future. And because of the textbook also have to cover what the student needs in the present means what the teacher thought they will need, and the future as well. So the teacher also have to think what the student might need in the future, what they will use, how they will use English in the future. The textbook have to help the student in this aspect. So it cannot only focus on what the teachers think the student need, but also have to cover other aspects as well. For example, in our department, we learn to be a teacher, and that is the aim and the purpose of the lecturers. But there are also several subjects that teach outside how to be a teacher, and it's because they know that the learners, us students, might not all of them become a teacher, and because of that they think about the future, how we will use our knowledge now, the English that we learn, how we will use it in the future. Not all of us will become a teacher, and that's why several subjects in our department doesn't refer to a teacher at all. They refer to other career as well. This is the example of how the criteria of the textbook. It also have to have the student in what they might be or they might use the English, the language itself in the future. Third one is the textbook have to facilitate the learner's studying process. For example, there are some students that might not understand just by reading an explanation of a material from the textbook. They need textbook that provide examples, or they need a textbook that provide the exercise, or provide like small box thing tips or tricks in the textbook, something like that. They might need that, and the textbook have to support them, to support this kind of students. And because of this, we have to do like investigating the student we will teach. You know that like Mr. Nanak, he gave us a questionnaire before teaching us, and that's also to determine like which kind of textbook most of his students need, and we should also do something like that, because textbook in this criteria, in the third criteria, have to facilitate the learner's study. The last one is the textbook have to get a clear role as a supporting aspect in the student's learning. It means the teacher cannot just find a textbook that will replace the teacher. Some teachers like just dump the textbook to the student and ask them to read the textbook, and then they learn from the textbook without the teacher as well, without the teacher at all. And this means the textbook already replaced the role of the teacher as the main facilitator for the students, because the role of the textbook is just a supporting aspect in the student's life. And because of this, you have to be careful in choosing the textbook. There are some textbooks that might be too good, and this might, replace your role as a teacher. Okay, so this is the last one. You can see from the PowerPoint there are other researchers or theorists as well that give us the criteria on how to evaluate the textbook. There are 3 points, but I will only explain the first point because the other points I already explained it in the previous videos. And the first point is, will the textbook stimulate and motivate the student? There are some kind of textbook that are just too boring. For example, the PDF that we get from other lecturers that is just like full of text without picture, without summary, without interactive question, without ideas or something like that. And that might be boring for high school student or middle school student, but for us students in university, it might be enough. But you have to think whether which textbook will stimulate and motivate the students, because usually textbook that have a good visual, like the design inside, the color, structure of the sentence put inside, whether it's neat or not, it will also help you to choose what kind of textbook is good for students. That's the material that I have explained to you. If you have any question, you can ask me or my other teammates. But this is all we have for now for this subject, for this material. Thank you, and let's meet on the other video if we have one. Bye bye.